Oh man, this thing is slow. What network am I on? Okay, I'm on the AT&T. Let me switch it over to Visible, see if that's any better. Man, it's still slow. Oh, hey. Sorry, didn't see you guys there. Is this something that you guys go through a lot, especially if you have multiple internet options in your RV? Watch this video to see how you can combine multiple internet sources into one larger pipe using all of the sources at the same time. And it's really not as hard as you think it might be. Let's check out Speedify. So what in the heck is Speedify? Well, it's actually a program. You can run it on your phone, you can run it on a computer, PC or Mac, or what we're going to do here is we're going to run it through a Raspberry Pi. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Why are you talking about Pi? This isn't the kind of pie you can eat. If you don't know what a Raspberry Pi is, well, it's a small single board computer like this right here, and we're going to use that to combine all of the internet sources that we currently have and any future ones we have into one big massive pipe. And Speedify is going to take care of all that for us automatically. Now, it is not free software, but it's not that expensive either. Let's take a quick look here at the Speedify website. So here at speedify.com, you can learn all about it. We're not going to go into too much detail here, but one thing you can do to test this is you can just go ahead and download it for free onto your computer or your phone or whatever and try it there. Now the nice thing about this with your phone too is if you have Wi-Fi, not through your phone, but if you have Wi-Fi, it'll actually combine the Wi-Fi source that your phone's connected to and your phone's mobile data and use them both together. So you just come here and download the one that works best for you. Like I said, they have all different flavors here. We're going to be downloading for Linux because that's for Ubuntu and Raspberry Pi. So now that we've got it downloaded, next step is we got to make a Pi. We got to make that Raspberry Pi. So let's get on it. So step one is we're going to go to get that operating system. Now Raspberry Pi OS is a pretty neat little operating system. So what we want to do is we want to scroll down here and get the Raspberry Pi Imager. And you can download it for Windows, Mac, or Linux. We want the Windows version. Once it's installed, it's already got it checked, run the Raspberry Pi Imager. We want to do that, so we'll click Finish. And for the operating system, we're going to come over here. You can go ahead and choose this Raspberry Pi OS 32-bit. That's the recommended one. Even though we have a 64-bit Raspberry Pi that we just built, I'm just going to go ahead and use this. So we'll select that. We'll choose our storage location, which is the thumb drive with that micro SD card in it. Before we hit the right button, we're going to click on this little gear down here. We're going to set up a few things to make our life easier down the road. We want to enable SSH. We want to use a password for authentication. And here you're going to set a username and password. And we'll just say test. And our password will be testing. We want to go ahead and configure the wireless network. This is the wireless network that the computer is connected to currently, so we'll go ahead and use that. Wireless LAN country, very important you set that correctly. By default it's set to Great Britain. So scroll down to US and select it. You can go ahead and set your locale here. Well, we're in Eastern time zone. Keyboard, you can play a sound when finished, eject the media when finished, yeah. Then click Save. And we're going to go ahead and click Write. So now it's going to download that operating system and install it onto the SD card. So while that's installing on the SD card, let's talk about what got us to this point. My Cradlepoint router license had expired and I need to come up with a better option or renew that license. My Visible phone can only connect to one device at a time, either through Wi-Fi or USB, as I'm not going to take it out of the phone and put it into a MiFi device, and I couldn't do that with the Calyx Institute T-Mobile 5G hotspot either. Taking that SIM out of the MiFi device would have violated that terms of service. So I didn't want to do anything like that. So I needed to come up with a way where I can connect and get the most speed out of the T-Mobile hotspot. And 5G routers that also have SIM cards are very expensive. So I looked at another option. We're actually going to be connecting to the T-Mobile hotspot using the USB cord and USB 3 ports on the actual Raspberry Pi. We're also going to connect the Visible phone via USB 3 to the Raspberry Pi, and unfortunately we weren't able to get the AT&T MiFi hotspot to work via USB with the Raspberry Pi, so we're going to use the Wi-Fi connection for that, and that's okay. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind with this solution is with the Raspberry Pi you can only connect one Wi-Fi device to it at a time. So we've already used up our Wi-Fi, so we're going to have to use the Ethernet connection, the network connection, whatever you want to call it, that's built into the Raspberry Pi. We're going to take that and plug it right into our TP-Link AX router. And all that is a big mouthful, but we're just going to walk through it and show you how it's done. So here we have the CanaKit Raspberry Pi 4 Starter Max kit. Now I got this simply because this is the quickest one I could get delivered to me. And I got it from Best Buy because they were actually quicker than Amazon. And another interesting note on this too is I actually ordered this from Best Buy because they didn't have it in stock at the local store, and I had it sent to a CVS store because that was one of the options, and I actually got it quicker going to the CVS store than by actually having it sent directly to Best Buy and picking it up there. So let's go ahead and open this thing up and see what we got inside. Now this kit can do 4K video, has 4 gig of RAM, and it comes with 64 gig of storage. But for the purposes of this, you don't really need anything that big. A Raspberry Pi 3 B Plus will work as well. I went with the 4 because I want, well, we'll show you in a second. So here's a USB cable, another USB cable, the README first, which, you know, we never read. Here's the power supply and some heat sinks. We're going to talk about those in just a second too. This is a USB-C power supply. Now the other Raspberry Pis I've had before, they were Raspberry Pi 3B Pluses, and they just had the micro SD. So this is a USB-C, so that's pretty nice. And you want to make sure that you're using one. If you get a Raspberry Pi that doesn't have a power supply, you make sure you have one that's rated to handle the power requirements of that Raspberry Pi. This one has an output of 5.1 volts at 3.5 amps. So you want to make sure that your power supply matches those as well. If not, you'll get a lot of low power warnings on your Raspberry Pi, or it may not even work, or you may do some damage. This kit came with a 64 gig SD micro SD card right there. Actually a pretty decent one, Samsung. There's a fan for the CPU. This is a card reader, so you can plug in your micro SD card into a regular USB slot on your computer in order to put the Raspberry Pi software on. So that's a nice little thing to come with. So this is the whole computer right here. And we're gonna just open the box real quick because it says open here. You open there you go. There it is. And there's instructions underneath in this little handy card, which will tell you to, well, it's got your eye, it says look, pay attention, grab it by the edges, no extreme temperature, don't touch it. So always grab by the edges. You always want to make sure that you're grounded if at all possible. You're not shooting off any static electricity, because you can zap this board and make your life kind of uncomfortable. Here is the case that this comes with. All the other Raspberry Pis I have, they've come with a clear case. This one, not clear, but you know what? Who cares? User guide, troubleshooting guide. Let's go ahead and get the box out of the way. Some of this other stuff out of the way. Now this quick start guide is just going to walk you through the different components of the Raspberry Pi board. And the biggest reason I went ahead and got a Raspberry Pi 4 instead of going with a 3B Plus is Well, simply because I wanted and needed the USB 3 ports that this board has. It tells you where to put the heat sinks, which are really nice. You got 3 different size heat sinks here, and they've got them numbered here, and you just put them, well, big one goes on the big one, medium, small. So we'll go ahead and do that. These heat sinks, you don't need to do anything but peel this backing off and put them on. So that's what we're going to do. You got some wiggle room to play with it, and once you get it on there, then we'll go on to the next one. Now, it may not be a bad idea to have a pair of needle nose pliers to install these if you have larger hands or you're a little clumsy. And you definitely want this thing to have good airflow because you're going to be putting a lot of data through it. Of course, now that we look at the instructions, the first thing it says is if you have a case, put it in the case first. So, and you want to do that mainly because if you put it in the case will help protect it from getting any electrostatic discharge. And you can see pretty easily where things line up here, and that just kind of sits in there. And you put that on the other piece on top, and we'll just leave that open for right now. So now we're going to come back here, get the fan out, which the other Raspberry Pis that I've had didn't have a fan, so I'm really excited that this actually has a fan. It actually goes right in there, like so. And the connections on these are on this long pin board here, and depending on if you wanted to go high speed or low speed will dictate which one you put this on. So the next step is I'm not going to close this, but I'm just going to kind of lay it on top for now. The next step is we're going to go ahead and plug this in. So we're going to get a little bit technical here, so pause it, rewind as much as you need to follow along. First thing we need to do is we need to enable the ability for us to see the graphical user interface of the Raspberry Pi. Now, if you have a keyboard monitor set up that you can plug into the Raspberry Pi, this will be pretty simple. We don't have it in this case. We're doing what's called a headless install, so we're going to have to connect to it through our network, and that's why it was important to go ahead and set up that Wi-Fi ahead of time. We can always change it later, but we had to have it set up so we can actually get into it. First thing you have to do, and I'm not going to show you here, is because it's different depending on your setup, is you have to find out what the IP address, Internet Protocol address, of your Raspberry Pi is. And to do that, you generally will need to log into your router, and it'll show you a list of the different IP addresses for all the devices connected to it. Now, once you find that out, just write that down. It'll be 192.168.something.something. And that's all you need to know for right now. Keep that off to the side. Then we're going to come over here and we're going to do a couple of things. First, we need to get a program called Putty, P-U-T-T-Y. So we're going to go to putty.org and we're going to download Putty. You can download it from here. You click on the link, download it for whatever you have. If you have a 64-bit Windows computer, you'll just use this one. Click on it, download it, install it, all the defaults, you'll be good to go. So then we'll go ahead and open that, and all you need to do now is type in that IP address that you had earlier, and now log in as. Now we're going to go to that username and password that we created when we built that image. So that's why it's important to have that as well. Once you're logged in, now we're going to jump over to the realvnc.com website, walk us through a couple of quick things we have to do there. So we're going to enable VNC. And to do that, we're going to type sudo rasp, and that'll bring up this, and we'll just use our arrow keys to go down to interface options and select i3 VNC and enable. Yes, we want to enable that, and it'll come back and tell us it's enabled. We'll come over here and hit finish. While you're here, go ahead, just type the command VNC server. So once you've typed in VNC server, it's going to come up, and all this stuff, all you really care about is right here, this next to the last line. It says new desktop is Raspberry Pi :2, and then it'll have your IP address with a colon and number 2. It may say 1, it could have any number, so make note of that number. So you'll need that colon, whatever the number is for you. So your IP address, colon, that. So we're going to go over here now, and we're going to go open up our VNC viewer, and we're going to get that from the same website we're looking at right now, realvnc.com. We're going to type that in this IP address and hit enter. You're going to get a box pop up like this. That's okay. Just hit continue. You're going to type in that same user ID and password you had earlier, and it's going to bring you to your graphical interface here for your Raspberry Pi. Now you're logged into Raspberry Pi. Congratulations. Next step, we need to install Speedify. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's jump over here to the Speedify website, and they'll walk you through the whole thing. So the first thing it's going to ask us to do is download Speedify. We'll click here on this little black box. It's going to open up a terminal window. Then we'll come back over here to our website, and we're going to copy all of that. So now we'll click on edit and paste, and that pastes that whole thing in there, and that's going to download and install it. So it's going to take a little while depending on your connection, and then once it's done, you'll be able to come up here to your program, which is a little Raspberry Pi, go down to internet, and you'll see Speedify right there. So once you open Speedify, it's going to ask you to log in. I went ahead and did that already, so we're logged in, and it recognizes all the different internet sources automatically. You don't have to do anything. It does it automatically. As you add and remove them, it recognizes them automatically. You cannot change these names though, unfortunately. So you kind of got to know what they are. By connecting them one at a time, you'll know which one's which, and you'll be able to keep it straight that way. In order to keep all these devices charged up, I went ahead and got a separate USB hub, so that's powered, so the power supply on the Raspberry Pi wouldn't be overtaxed trying to keep the 3 different hotspot devices charged up. So we've got that plugged in. Everything's plugged into that. We have our T-Mobile with the USB connector, visible phone. We're tethering using USB, and there's an option if you're using a visible phone or a phone that you want to do USB tethering from. There's an option, at least for Android phones, I'm not sure about iPhones, where you can set that up so it's tethering USB by default. We're using wireless with the AT&T solution because we just couldn't get the USB to work. Now watch this ETH0, and it says disabled. Well, that's how we're connecting to our TP-Link AX router, and we're going to do a little bit of configuring to make that work too. So we're going to have to jump back into a terminal window. We can just do that right here. We don't have to go back to PuTTY, and another website to go to. So a couple of commands we have to do here. This website, links in the description for this one as well. We're going to edit this file, so we're going to go ahead and copy, highlight, copy, and come down here and edit and paste and enter. First thing we have to do is this first. It's already done here, sorry. Enable sharing needs to be equal to 1, so you just use your up and down and left right arrow keys to go over here and change that to 1. Then you'll come down here to your share interface, and this is the name, the machine name of your Ethernet port in your Raspberry Pi. By default, it's ETH0. That's not an O, that's a 0. If you're not sure, just take your mouse, highlight it here, and you'll see everything. You'll see where it says all of your different connections you have, and you'll see it says ETH0. Interface IP, you need to set it to something that's not going to be involved in your network, and they give you an example there, 192.168.145.1. I went with 95.1 instead. And the DNS servers, those are fine, leave them as they were. and then you'll press again for Windows, Control O to save the file, then hit enter, then Control X to exit out, and then you'll just run this command right here to restart the service with the new configuration. Edit, paste, enter, and it restarts the service. It will disconnect for a second, and then it brings it right back up, and we're done. And everything's connected Ethernet 0. So now we've got to go and hook up the Ethernet cable to our router and get the router configured as well. I hope I haven't lost you. Again, just take your time. This is pretty simple, pretty inexpensive solution as well. So now, as you can see, we're going to go from the Raspberry Pi to our router, connected with that Ethernet cable or network cable. Now your setup may vary for your router, so you'll have to use your Google knowledge to figure out how to configure your own router. Easiest way to do this is for your internet connection. You're going to set that to static IP. The IP address is the same IP address that you just configured on that Ethernet 0 port. It just changes last octet, this last number after the period, to any other number besides the one that was you configured that Raspberry Pi. You can't use 0, and it has to be 254 or less. So I just picked 2. Easy enough. Your subnet mask will be that. Your default gateway will be whatever the IP address that you put in for that Raspberry Pi. Then these primary and secondary DNS servers, they also should match what you set in that configuration file. And that's it. You connect that and it all should work. As you can see here, it automatically selected the cellular and the wireless LAN, so Visible and AT&T. It automatically select them as secondary. But I can click on these and change them to whatever I want under priority. Secondary is recommended, and it says use this connection for speed boosts and failover, but less than primary. And so I can select this as primary. I can select all of them as primary, and it'll use all 3 of those at the same time. Problem with that could be you'll actually end up slowing down overall by doing that. If you have connections that are, you know, markedly slower than others, leave them as secondary. You want your fast connection or fast connections to be your primary. And that's it. No more configuring, done. You can actually run a speed test here. There's also a live stream test you can do to see your ability to live stream. But we're going to click here on the menu and come down here to performance test, and we're going to start a speed test. Now you may run into some issues with some streaming services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, etc. There are some configurations within Speedify that you may need to adjust to enable you to watch those different streaming services through Speedify. Okay, that's pretty good. We have not great service here. One thing you can see here, this 2 completed down here under streams. You can see how much this is actually working. We've actually, just today, it's prioritized a couple of, well, like it says, video calls, voice over IP, or live streams, and kept them running. Also, if my primary goes down for whatever reason, it automatically fails back to these. You don't even notice it. You may see a small blip. And here it is in all of its glory, and I'm probably going to be moving this, even though I just made this all look nice and pretty. There's my hotspot for my Nomad internet, which is AT&T. T-Mobile hotspot's up here. There's my Visible phone. That's a powered USB 3 hub switch, which is connected to the Raspberry Pi we talked about. And there is my TP-Link AX router. Everything run nice and easy, and I put the Raspberry Pi in this position because I had originally put it up here next to the switch. You can see that command strip there. All this stuff is connected with the command strips, with the exception of the router, which actually is screwed in. But I put the Raspberry Pi there simply to make sure it has good airflow, because there is space underneath here, and it's just held on with a command strip, so I can always move it if I want to. So that's it. Wasn't that complicated, was it? Now, I hope I didn't lose anybody. If I did, go back and watch it if you want to try this, or just leave us a note in the comments below and let us know. Let us know if you have a better idea, because I'm always out there looking for something better, looking for something easier. Now, I will give you a quick teaser. We will be adding Starlink to this setup very soon, so stay tuned for that. Starlink is on the way for our Epic RV adventure. So if you haven't already done so, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below so you can follow our adventures and also see what Starlink's going to do for us, among other things. And if you'd like to help us help Christian-based veterans charities, take a look in the description below to see all the different ways that you can help us. Remember, we don't keep a dime of the money we make off our social media platforms. We donate it all to a Christian-based veterans charity. So if you have a Christian-based veterans charity in mind that could use some help, drop us a note in the comments, or shoot us an email as well. We'd love to hear about them and get in contact with them. So thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, make your next journey an epic adventure. Bye.